Hi, everyone. This is the first in a series of interviews with former A&M San Antonio students who are either in the workforce or in graduate school. Today, we have Amy Senger, who graduated in the summer of 2019, and she's currently in her second year at Sam Houston State University, pursuing her master's in clinical psychology. Hi, Amy.
Hi.
Real quickly, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your current program and maybe your future plans?
Sure. Hi guys, I'm Amy. I am a San Antonio native. So I did my undergrad, as Dr. Nguyen said, at A&M San Antonio. I'm currently at Sam Houston State, so I'm starting my second year. So I'm actually starting to see clients now and getting more into the clinical portion, and as well as starting to finish up and getting ready to graduate. So that's exciting. As far as my future plans go, I am interested in pursuing a PhD in clinical psychology. So I'm in the process of applying right now. Some of you guys might be, so it's a process, but yeah, so that's where I'm at, and that's where I'm hopefully going.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, so today we'll be asking some questions, and hopefully, if we have an audience, people will also ask questions. But we definitely have a long list of questions. These are student submitted questions, and I think generally they kind of capture the essence of concerns that students have surrounding graduate school. So first, these two questions kind of get at your motivation and your decision to pursue graduate school. So what are you studying in grad school, and how did you decide on this field?
So I'm studying clinical psychology, and most of my research is focusing on health psychology or behavioral medicine. It's been a long path to get where I am. I talked to a lot of people before deciding to pursue clinical, a lot of different fields, and not just people in clinical, but I talked to people from school psych, I talked to people in social, and I figured that this was the best fit for what I wanted and where I wanted to be. So a lot of times to figure out where you want to go, it's best to work backwards. So find a position that you like, that you're like, okay, this is going to match not only like what I want professionally, but my life goals. And then work backwards, see what degrees are required or which ones are considered competitive. And for me, that ended up being clinical psychology.
Excellent. Thank you. Did you take a break or not, and what was your decision into that?
So I did.
I mean a break prior to beginning graduate school. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So I didn't take a break. And the reason being was I honestly felt like I was kind of ready for grad school. I didn't feel ready in a sense, but I did. So I was ready to move on with my career. And I think for folks who are considering taking a break, I would really kind of think about that, about why do you want to take a break? Are you doing some self-care, or are you getting burned out? And just kind of take a moment to see what's going on.
Right. And this is not on the list of questions, but just as a follow-up, now that you've been in your program for a year, do you get a sense of how many people took a break prior to starting your program, and how many people went straight in?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. We do have some folks who took a break. I would say maybe two, three, maybe three out of my cohort, 3 out of 7 who did take a break prior. And I would recommend that if you are taking a break, to make it worth your while. And so what those folks did that really actually, I think, gave them a bit of an edge was they spent that time getting clinical experience, because clinical experience is something that comes with time and a whole lot of patience. So it would be worth it, I think, if you're going to spend a year off, to get it doing clinical experience or getting research experience, or both, which would be the best option.
Excellent. So I'm trying to turn my volume up here, and it's actually going the wrong way. Okay, all right. So I think I can hear you fine. Oh, there's a person here, so I'm going to admit them. Maybe they'll join us. I'm not sure where they are. Anyways, let's see, gallery view. Hey, Kesha, I'm just gonna keep you in the background as we continue with this conversation. Okay. All right, so tell us about grad school. What is it like? What's grad school like? How is it different? How is it similar to undergrad?
So there's actually a lot of similarities, I think, between grad school and undergrad as far as didactics go. So what I mean by that is that like the classes are pretty much the same, right? So a lecture is always going to be a lecture, no matter where you go, what you do. The tests I would say are a bit different. So this depends on your professor, but some of them do multiple choice, but a lot of them do more essay questions, more applied questions, because again, you're in an applied program now, so you're going to get applied questions. Um, Also, another thing to note is the atmosphere. So with undergrad, you're kind of like, you guys have a really good advantage in that at TMUSA, you have a lot of small class sizes. But when you go to a bigger university, it's like 200 people per class, while at TMUSA, you might have only maybe 20 or 30 people. So in grad school, your class sizes are going to be about like 7 or 20. So it's a lot smaller class sizes. A lot of the folks, like a lot of the faculty get to know you really well. And it's highly interpersonal. So making sure you make those good impressions at the beginning and as you go through your program is a really big deal in grad school.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So I guess you you touched on it a little bit, but can you say a little bit more about how your classes are set up, and is it expected that you conduct research? Is it more of a sort of a collaborative feel between you and your professor? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So with my classes, so there's like 3 different questions going on there, so I'll address them one
Right.
at a time. But so with the collaboration, I think I've only ever done like 2 group projects the entire time I'm here, but it's more
Hmm.
collaborative in the sense that you get to know your cohort mates really well, because they kind of become almost like a second family just because
Yeah.
you spend so much time with them. And so I would argue that it is more collaborative in that aspect. And like we form a lot of study groups together. So we do spend a lot of time with your peers. And regarding the class structure, it depends on what classes you're talking about. For more applied classes like assessment, which is what we do as clinical psychologists, you know, obviously your class structure is going to be different. So you're going to have more experiential opportunities, and more experiential assignments. You're going to be writing more reports rather than taking tests.
Okay.
And then I think there is one last question. I'm sorry, I forgot the last part.
No, I think you kind of touched on most of it. What the class structure, whether or not it's you know, research based. Okay. Are you liking graduate school so far? Are you happy with your current decision to pursue graduate school?
So I am. I really do like what I do, and I enjoy the different parts. And I think that's just something that is worth taking the time to know about yourself. Like, what do you enjoy and what do you not enjoy? Because that's grad school is a big investment. So you know, it's worth it to figure out what you want to do and what you like.
Very cool. Good. I'm glad that it's not a terrible experience. Um, okay, so the next set of questions are more about preparation for graduate school. And I apologize if some of them are a little bit repetitive. So first, do you feel like A&M San Antonio prepared you well to be competitive when you were pursuing graduate school?
So I think there's 2 answers to that question. So number one is that I think TMUSA does really have a really great faculty, and that you guys put a lot of time and effort into your students. And that's not, you don't get that at some of the bigger universities. And so that's a really, you guys are kind of getting the deluxe model of treatment. So I think that's really great. The second part I would answer is that, you know, I think what the question is asking, does my school prepare me? But I think what you should be asking yourself is, are you preparing yourself for your future, right? Because you can have all the resources in the world and not do anything with them. So I think that's more of a question: are you taking advantage of everything that your department is having to offer, as well as your program and other clubs that the university may be offering?
Cool, cool, great. Um, Yeah, so to follow up on that, what besides your classes that you took here, what extra stuff did you do to help prepare you for graduate school?
So I definitely got involved in research, and that's the number one thing that anyone will tell you if you're interested in grad school, because that's essentially what you'll be doing in grad school is research. So I got involved in some lab teams, including yours, Dr. Wynn.
Mm-hmm.
And within that too, we applied to Psych grants, and we received a Psych grant, which I felt kind of set me apart from other folks, as well as we were a part of, a colleague and I were a part of a interdisciplinary research internship, and that's kind of a big deal in clinical because you're working with an integrated team of professionals, so you have to learn to work with folks from other disciplines. So I think that also really helped.
Excellent, excellent. So you said you got involved in research. What was the process like? How were you able to pursue those experiences?
Like the process of joining a lab or
Yeah,
actually conducting
yeah,
research?
yeah. Like students watching this, it's like, oh yeah, so research is important. What do I have to do to become involved in research?
So I would definitely consider your own interests as far as like, well, what are you wanting to pursue, and look up faculty members at A&M-SA and see what their areas of specialty are in. Approach that faculty member. I would say send a very nicely worded email asking to potentially discuss research interests, and realize that this is a privilege. So research is not something that it's just expected, and it takes a lot of time and energy to mentor someone. So I think just going in with the idea of like, this is a privilege that I'm getting to receive, and treating your position, if you get one, as such.
Great, good stuff. So you talked a little bit about research experience, but what do you think are important classes to take while you're here? And do you actually think your classes play an important role in your success in graduate school?
So definitely yes. The classes that I would recommend students take that are interested in clinical are physio, abnormal, intro to clinical psych. I think assessment is being offered now, which was something that I didn't have when I was an undergrad, but that's also a really great class to take. And motivation and emotion, I think, was another one that you guys can take that I think would be great. Also, any other areas of interest. So if you're interested in health psych, take health psych, or if you're interested in forensics, take that. So really any kind of specialties you're interested in, take that now. And I do think they prepared me because honestly, my intro to clinical psych was exactly like one of my graduate courses. It was pretty much a review for me. So you're also expected in graduate school to know the foundations because you're in an applied program. So they're expecting you have that foundation, you know the theories, and that you can apply them. And so that's more of what you're learning in graduate school.
That's great. That's really nice to hear. Let's see here. So you talked about what got you attention. So research. Okay. So what do you wish that now that you're a year into it, what do you wish that you would have known sort of prior to this year, or even prior to starting graduate school?
So I wish I would have known that there's more than one way to skin a cat, in that I recently learned that, so I'm trying to gather my thoughts here. So depending on the position you want, there's a lot of different ways to get to it. So clinical psych is not the end all be all. I certainly enjoyed it and would like to continue with it, but like if you're interested in a hospital research position, there's a degree called behavioral medicine that's actually just like pure research without the clinical stuff. A lot of social psychologists actually work in applied settings as well, which is something I didn't know. You can also do counseling psychology. So just explore your options and know that, even if you don't get into a clinical psych program, there's a lot of other options to choose from that. I've heard essentially like counseling psychology is apparently almost the same thing as clinical. I think the main difference is assessment, but yeah, so that's just something I would definitely would have explored more as an undergraduate if I'd known.
That's great. Yeah. From my understanding, sort of the main difference between clinical and counseling is that clinical is more about sort of illness and disease, right? Whereas counseling is maybe perhaps a little bit more about wellness. I don't know. Do you get a sense that your clinical program is being trained or is training you differently than what a counseling program would?
So that's a good question. I think you put it very nicely about the difference. So another way to say it was that clinical folks tend to work with people with more severe illnesses. So you tend to see more people who have like schizophrenia, bipolar. Those are the folks that show up at psychiatric inpatient. While counseling, you're dealing more with like, oh, I'm having trouble adjusting to school. I'm having maybe some stress because of these life events. I honestly don't feel that my program's really directing me one way or another. We get a pretty well-rounded education, and I think part of that too is deciding where to do your practicums. So you have a lot of freedom in where to choose and how to kind of mold your own education. So for me, I did my first practicum at a psychiatric inpatient. It was an emergency center, so we got to see a lot of those severe folks. And now I'm doing my applied practicum at a counseling center. So we do at a university counseling center. So I'm getting a lot of diverse clients that don't have as much severe problems.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. I think this is kind of broad one. What professors? I guess you can speak both here at A&M San Antonio, and also now that you have a year under your belt. What professors kind of have helped you in the process, and I guess more importantly, how do you recommend that students go and be able to build those relationships with professors that they yet have a relationship with?
Yeah, so those are some good questions. Definitely the folks that helped me at A&M-SA was Dr. Nguyen, who is my primary advisor. Also, Dr. Bowman and Dr. Wise, they were actually my first research mentors. And as well as Dr. Kalmbach, I spent a lot of time talking to her about clinical issues as well as asking for career advice. So those are definitely some of the folks at A&M-SA that kind of helped me get where I am today. And one way to go about building those relationships is start basics is how are you presenting yourself? So are you coming to class on time? Are you turning in assignments on time? Are you doing what you're doing well? And that usually catches folks' attention. Secondly, do you have an interest in the field? Are you spending time, like actually, is it something that you're passionate about? So for me, I would say for office hours and ask a bunch of questions about different things I was interested in. As well as being a part of a lab is a really great way to kind of get to know your professors outside of the classroom. So I think those are definitely some ways to kind of get to know faculty, as well as taking several classes with them if you can. Some of the folks that I'm currently are some of my mentors at SAM as my primary advisor. Her name is Dr. Chelsea Ratcliffe. So she's my thesis chair, as well as my main research mentor. And I actually applied to her lab before I even applied to SAM, and that's something I would highly recommend folks doing, especially in a master's program, because you're not guaranteed a mentor like you are in PhD. And so that's really important to apply and ask, hey, do you have a spot for me before you apply to the program itself? Because we've had a lot of folks who come to the program and don't do that, and they may or may not get a mentor. So that's a really important tip I would recommend. And a couple other folks I have, Dr. David Nelson, I TA'd for him for a class, as well as taken him for several classes. And I've shown interest because he's who I want to be when I grow up. He's trained in general psychology, health psychology, and neuropsychology. Like, he has been here since the beginning of the DSM. And he's been really great. And then, of course, Dr. Nguyen still is one of my primary mentors. Even as I've graduated, we've kept in contact. So.
Right. Yeah. I think there are a couple of things I want to emphasize through Amy's comments. Is one that if you're a student watching this, yeah, really your performance in your classes really kind of help kind of separate you from your peers, right? So I remember explicitly inviting actually Amy into my lab after having her as a student, and I think it was research methods, right? Or was it? Yeah. And in any case, it helps that you show interest, but it also helps that you kind of display that through your behaviors, through turning in quality work. And secondly, I think something that students don't understand is that just because you've graduated, it doesn't mean that your relationship ends. Certainly, we're here for forever till we're old and die. But certainly don't cut us out. Like if you've asked us to write you a letter, follow up with us. Let us know if you've gotten in. Let us know if you didn't get in, what your plans are, and how we can help in that process. All right. So let's see. In this last section here, here's a pretty broad question. But what are the steps that I should take, I as a student, to prepare for graduate school?
So I think a lot of what we've already touched on, getting involved in research, building those lasting relationships with faculty. Also, if you can, get clinical experience. I know it's harder to get at a bachelor's level, but I know you can get jobs as like, I think, applied behavior technician or something like that. I know a lot of folks come in with ABA experience. So applied behavior analysis, that's one way to get experience. Because again, those clinical skills are not something that you can develop overnight. So if you can start early on them, do. And I think that makes you really competitive, as well as getting good scores on the GRE. If you can get a publication or really presenting research, doing anything with research is a really big deal, because that shows that you have a commitment to the field and that you're interested in it and can produce quality work.
Excellent. That's actually a great lead-in. So you touched on the GRE. So any suggestions on how to study or prepare for the GRE? Should you apply for a program that requires the GRE?
So the last question is a really easy one. Yes, because most programs will require the GRE. So although I know a lot of them are using the COVID situation to waive scores, and some of them are using that as testing grounds to decide whether or not they want to waive the GRE permanently or not. So I don't know if this will even be applicable a year from now, but in the event that you do have to take the GRE, what I can recommend is spend enough time studying, get the right material. So for me, I got the ETS books, as well as I did Kaplan vocabulary flashcards my whole summer, and develop a plan of study. So I studied an hour each night, and I think more than 1 hour on the weekends, as well as taking practice tests. So those are just some of the tips I can recommend for the GRE.
Excellent. So when were most of your applications due, and when did you start studying for the GRE relative to your application due dates?
So my applications, I had one due in December, and then two, I think, were due in February. So I want to say it was either January, February, something like that. So you want to take your GRE the latest, October, and I waited till the last minute to take it. So I would not recommend that. If you can, take it earlier. And I would recommend even taking it earlier than what I did, because it gives you the chance to retake it, because the GRE is a beast. And it's okay if you don't get the score you want the first time around, because you have the option to retake. So I would probably recommend, if you have applications in December, taking it maybe in like April or May. That way you have the summer to restudy and then take it again if you need to. But if not, then at least you have it done and out of the way.
Excellent. So I guess you have the option to share your percentile score if you want. You don't have to, but how important do you think your scores were to your admissions process?
So I did get higher verbals than my quant. So I got a 93rd percentile verbal and a 37 percentile quant. And I talked to my mentor about that, because I was concerned when I was applying to doc programs if I needed to retake it. So what my mentor told me, and she's on the admissions committee, I believe, for the doctoral program at Sam Houston State, is that verbal is a lot more important than quantitative. However, I would argue if you're applying to somewhere that has a quantitative minor, like what I did the first time around, it's important to have a high quant score for that. A lot of places want at least average. And the reason why they told us is their concern is if you're not at least average on these, they're concerned that you're behind and that you're going to take a lot more like tutoring and one-on-one attention to catch you up to folks who have that average percentile. So if anything, if you get a higher verbal score, you're going to be okay, but that's a more important one, at least from what I've heard. But yeah, that's pretty much the gist.
Yeah, I mean, getting in the 93rd percentile is extremely impressive, and so I think you can probably overcome some your quant score because of how impressive your verbal scores were. I think other things students should probably, well, when you say average, that's 50th percentile, right? And I also think to some extent your quant score, your math score can be overcome by demonstrating things like research experience, publications, and then your letters your letter writers can probably talk to the extent that you get stats and you're okay in that domain as well. So I guess just to wrap up questions about this application process, can you talk us through sort of the minor details that maybe we have missed during the application process? Maybe, I don't know, how you dealt with the waiting period or any of that stuff that we haven't touched on yet.
So the application process, it's actually really easy as far as like the process itself. The only thing that I think we haven't talked about is personal statements.
Mm-hmm.
So with those, it's pretty much the way that I've had it described to me from faculty who are on those admitting boards is that those are a way to weed out people. So it's not like, no one I don't think has ever gotten in because they had a super like great personal statement. Other people have been excluded because of them. So that's to say is that they're looking for red flags in those. So like, don't start your essay by saying, I got into psychology because my grandpa died or something like that, unless you have like a really great way to somehow tie that in, I guess, to geropsychology. But
Right.
yeah, don't start anything off like that. Because this is essentially, it's like a first introduction. So you're wanting to give a good impression, you're wanting to seem excited, motivated, and that you can do, and that you're willing and able to do this degree.
Gotcha. Very good. Sorry for the interruption. My dog was barking. Oh, KC. I wonder if this is Dr. Kalmbach who is joining us. Okay, so we've talked about the application process. Let's see here. We have a few questions left. Let's talk about the finances. How are you paying for graduate school? Was that a major factor in the types of programs you applied to?
So that was definitely a factor in programs I applied to, and it's even a factor for me now. So there are a lot of different ways to pay for grad school. I chose SAM because they offered the best, like they had the most financial resources for master's students, because they're a little bit harder to come by, especially if a program has a doctoral program, just because most of the energy and resources are being put into them.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are still opportunities. So I've gotten scholarships to help pay, as well as I work as a TA within my department. And then I also do have my parents help me pay.
Yay, parents.
Yeah.
So in your first round of applications about a year and a half ago, obviously you were looking at both master's and PhD programs. Can you talk a little bit about what you saw in terms of funding for the master's programs that you applied to and funding for PhD programs?
So with PhD programs, you tend to get a more like all-inclusive package. So you're getting tuition remission most of the time, or essentially some way they're being able, like they'll pay your tuition for you, as well as a living stipend. While with masters, it's not as guaranteed. So it's a little bit more expensive. Well, not a little bit, it's more expensive, I'll be honest. But there are, like I said, there are ways to find finances for it, but doctoral programs tend to be better funded in general.
Cool. One common question that I've gotten is about online master's programs. Can you talk about your evaluation, and now that you've sort of been a year as a graduate student, sort of the general consensus or the general feeling towards online programs?
So I'm always super suspicious of anyone who has a clinical degree that came from an online program, just because you need to be in person for this. Granted, with the current pandemic, we are doing telehealth. However, it's just grad school is highly interpersonal. And if you're doing an online program where you're not meeting your cohort, you're not meeting your professors, you're really missing out on really the core of what grad school is. And that's making those connections, because these folks are also going to, if you do it right, these folks are going to be with you for pretty much the long haul. So that would be my concern with online programs, and especially clinical, because too, with clinical skills, a lot of them are practicing your nonverbal. So it's how to be in a room with the client. So there's just so much that goes into it, that, and also assessment too, I would argue, that requires you to be in person. So I would be very hesitant to recommend online programs over an in-person.
Yeah, and I think hesitant is a really kind of important word, because I think with all programs, in-person programs can be bad as well, right? Can be poor in quality. But I think generally speaking, you want to be really kind of careful with your research when you're looking at online programs, especially. So you know, are how are you managing with the finances? I guess the direct question here is it expensive as it seems? How do you feel like you're set up for your future, having to deal with the expenses of grad school?
So I definitely think it would have been better if I could have gone to some place that had an all-inclusive package, just because, you know, you're not having to worry about like, okay, I need to apply to scholarships this semester. Am I going to get them? Because too, even as graduate students, you're competing against other folks in other graduate schools who are applying to the same scholarships. So if you can, I would definitely recommend getting someplace or getting into some place that has that all-inclusive package. But if you can't, then I mean, you know, do your best and work with what you have. But just be mindful of like loans, because I have several cohort members who are having to do that or work full time, and that can be a really big strain.
Excellent. And we're going to touch on the work-life balance in a little bit. So I'm excited about that conversation as well. So your ultimate goal is to enter a PhD program, but what kind of general advice do you have someone who just wants to pursue a terminal master's, where they get their master's and they start working with that degree, and that's the only degree that they want to pursue?
So with master's in clinical psych, there's several things I'm going to recommend. Is that number one, check that your school meets licensure requirements. That's a big deal, because without a licensure, you can't practice. It doesn't matter how great of a school you go to. If you don't pass your boards, you don't have a license, there's not really much you can do with it aside from, I mean, granted, there are some opportunities, but if you're wanting to do clinical practice, you can't without a license. Secondly, with a master's, since you're going to if you're going to do a master's in clinical psych and you plan to do clinical practice primarily, because that's, I'll be honest, that's where the money is. If you're going to be doing that, then I would recommend figuring out if you like it, because clinical practice is something else in that you either like it or you don't. There's a lot of folks who come into the program thinking that they're going to do clinical practice full time, and then they end up not liking it. And that's a lot of time and energy to put into something. So that's why I really recommend seeing if you can get some exposure to it prior to entering a program. That would be great.
Excellent. That's really good advice. Okay, so you're a year into it. What are you preparing now? What are you doing this current stage? You talked a little bit about your curriculum, but yeah. So tell us what you're doing now to help you prepare for the next phase of your career.
So right now, I've actually been pretty much what I've been doing. I've been preparing since semester one, and that's really, really important in a master's program, because time is your enemy. So you really have to make sure that you are organized and that you have a plan of what you're going to do and where you're going, because these years, like these semesters, just fly by. So what I did to prepare is I started a project semester one with my advisor. I said, hey, here's my idea. I have multiple design plans. In the event we can't get this population, let's do this instead. And so that really helped, because theses or individual projects can take a while, especially like if you have something like a pandemic that happens. You know, if you start that first semester, you have that cushion. And so for me, that really helped, because my thesis is working with first responders who got hit by the pandemic pretty bad. So right now I'm in the phase of data collection, and I plan to defend come spring. So that's one thing to do, is either have a thesis, or it's better if you can get a publication, because that looks really great, as well as choosing your practicums wisely. So if you are wanting to work with a certain population, try and get practicums with them. So for me, I didn't have the option of doing a health psych focus. However, I did apply to an internship at MD Anderson, which I received. However, I wasn't able to go because of COVID. So that got deferred till next year. But that's something to do. You're wanting to demonstrate, hey, this is what I like, and also trying to kind of hone yourself in your research, because prior to this, like, my research portfolio was all over the place. So I had like a study on mosquitoes, I had a study with like vaccination, and they're like, wait, you want to study anxiety, what? So it's a lot of just kind of making fine-tuning your research as well. So for me, now I have a strong profile of, hey, you know, I've been involved in health psych studies, and I can attest this is something I want to do.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I do want to just make a quick side note that I think I maybe see a question in the chat box. We're going to try to get to all of those at the end. And we just have a few more questions here that we have submitted before we kind of open it up for questions. Okay. You doing okay? You hanging in there? Good. Okay, so now let's talk about work-life balance. So what is graduate school like in terms of schoolwork, and how do you find a balance between work, school, and life?
So graduate school, as I mentioned earlier, has a lot of freedom. So there's a lot of freedom in how you arrange your schedule, what kind of opportunities you want to become involved with. So a lot of that balance, I think, comes from understanding what is your limit of what you can take on comfortably. Well, maybe sometimes a little bit uncomfortably, but what is your limit before you know you're in a situation where it's not good. So a lot of that, I think, is just knowing yourself. But two is making the time to do self-care, because especially as a clinician, if you work with clients, like I have some clients who have experienced severe trauma. And so for me, I have a ritual that, like, after I get off clinic, I go and I get something to eat. I watch maybe a couple episodes of The Office, kind of decompress, and then go on with my day. So self-care is really important, especially as a clinician, because you can't pour from an empty cup.
That's great stuff. Thank you. Um, I'm getting a notification here. It says your bandwidth is low, so I apologize if the video is a little laggy. I hear you fine, which I hope the audio comes out in the recording. Can you talk a, a little bit about your experience with your peers? Because I know that you don't have little children running around, or other kind of major life responsibilities. Can you talk about maybe your interactions with folks who are married and have kids, or have to work a full-time job outside of the program, and maybe share you know your interactions with them, and maybe how they're dealing with things?
Yeah. So I do have a friend in my cohort who works a full-time 40-hour job outside of school. So with her, she really just a terrific person, honestly, to be able to do that, because that's a lot of stress. Just because you have your coursework, and if you're trying to do research, in her case, she's taking a year off, so she's not really doing much in the realm of research, which, to be honest, I kind of wouldn't recommend, just because research is really important if you want to go into a PhD program. However, in her case, she's taking a year off. She's wanting to get that licensure. So she's doing a clinical job, which is 40 hours a week. And I know she lives with a partner, so she does have to make time for that, I'm sure, as well. I do know folks in my cohort who have children, they're moms. I have no idea how they do it. They're amazing. But yeah, I think a lot of it's just time management, just time management skills you're building right now, and learning how to manage what you're doing now, because it gets kicked up a notch in grad school. So it's just translating, because you have 4 years to build these right now. So definitely that's something I would recommend, is working on your time management skills. So that way, when you get to grad school, it's not going to be that much of a transition.
Excellent. Thank you. I want to maybe pause a little bit here to maybe give the chance for the internet to catch up. I don't know if that's how it works. But okay, so the last big question is, how do you not let it consume your life? Grad school, that is.
So it's funny because I actually sent that question to a friend, because, and he told me that only if you let it. And I think that's a really good response, in that, again, you have so much freedom in grad school. You can organize your life how you want it. So you can either be super busy, you can be involved in 16 research projects if you're absolutely crazy, or you can be involved in 1 or 2, or not even do research. If clinical practice is all you want to do, you don't have to be involved. So it's what you make out of it. And I think that's true for undergrad too. You get you get out of it what you put into it. So you can mold your educational experience to be what you need and what you want. So for me, I've learned how to say no. I've learned that maybe 4 or 5 projects is my max. And some of them I realize are a lot slower. I know they're going to be slower paced. So for those, I'm not as worried about. But some folks, that's only 1 or 2 projects, or that's just a thesis. So it's a lot of using those time management skills, doing what you can take without having, mental breakdowns in graduate school.
Right. You don't have to talk about your own personal experience. Actually, I would probably prefer it if you didn't, but can you just talk about sort of the general the mental health of graduate students? Like how often are you seeing breakdowns in your cohort?
So there's definitely some individuals who are more prone to stress, I would say, in that they're a lot more tightly wound. And so those folks, I think, probably once a semester, I'll be honest.
That's not bad.
And
That's not
definitely
bad.
there's some semesters that are more stressful. I was like, that's pretty good. Or at least what I know about anyway. But our first semester, that was really tough, and it can be a tough transition from undergrad. So I just encourage you to have like a lot of self-compassion with yourself, to realize that. Sorry, I don't know what that sound is. But sorry. But pretty much just with mental health in general, there's a lot of things going on in graduate school. There's a lot of pressure. However, that's why it's really important to have a self-care routine, take that time for yourself, to be a human being and not just a grad student in a research machine or a clinician machine. So really just doing that time to make self-care, because if you want to be here for the long haul, that's what you're going to have to do.
Excellent. I think that's really important advice. I think for one is understanding that like breakdowns happen, and mental health is a real thing. Just because you're a clinical psychologist, or you're wanting to become a clinical psychologist doesn't mean that you're immune to it. I think sometimes students feel bad that they're in a psych program, and they can't quote cure themselves, right? It's like, if I'm if I'm a allergy doctor, it doesn't mean that it makes me immune to being allergic to things, and I think that's kind of important for students to consider when they enter a psychology program. Um, before we open it up for questions, um, why don't you kind of summarize maybe the best or the top three things that you think are absolutely critical for students who want to enter a graduate school program?
That's tough. Three things. So number one, I would say most of the folks who get into graduate school, like I said, are kind of tightly wound. So just being gentle with yourself, realizing there is room for failure. In fact, you will fail a lot, and that is okay. A lot of times you can learn from it. So just being gentle with yourself, giving yourself allowance to fail, to make mistakes. Because oftentimes that's kind of what helps mold you. So you learn from those mistakes, and maybe you might say to yourself like, oh, I'm not good at this, or like, I can't be a clinician because I don't have those skills, but that's not true. You need to give yourself time to adjust, time to learn, and time to grow. Secondly, I would say is, again, work backwards from where you want to be. So if you know in general, this is the kind of position I want, look and see what degrees are actually, like, go on Indeed and like search that title and see what are they requiring. Thirdly, make the most of your experience now. So definitely take advantage of your resources. Get to know the faculty there, because they are there to support you. They're really great people. And again, they're people that if you do it right, you're going to have lasting relationships with. So yeah, just take advantage, do well, and be gentle with yourself.
That's good stuff. Okay. Sorry to put you on the spot there. I know I didn't prep you for that question, but I kind of wanted to know what is floating kind of at the top of your head when you think about that. So I'm going to go through to the chat box to see if we have any questions here. Let's see. So. But yeah, okay. So the first one is just asking me to be recorded. So yes, I'll record it. Okay, a student asked, I apologize if she has already answered, but I wanted to ask how she decided which direction she wants to go in the field.
Yeah, so I talked on that a little bit earlier, but I'm happy to kind of go over again. So what I did was I talked to a lot of different people about it. So I told Dr. Wynn, I talked to folks in social psych, I talked to folks in clinical psych, I talked to folks, I think even in counseling too, to kind of piece out like what I wanted to do. And the reason why I chose clinical psych was it gives me a lot of options. So I have the option to go into academia if I want, but I also have the option to work in an applied setting, so to be a clinician, or to do like a little bit of both, which is also great. That's something too, I would also say that I did not know in undergrad that I wish I knew is that it's a lot harder to do both, because when I was in undergrad, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna have like a full-time faculty position, and I'll also be doing like clinical work on the side. It's a lot of work. I would just say that it's definitely doable, but it's just, they're both full-time jobs in and of themselves, even if they are partial positions. So I think in order to do them well, I would probably stick to one.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so if anyone else, or if you have a follow-up question to that, please feel free to ask a follow-up question. Um, Before I let you go, I do want to kind of remind people of your timeline, because you came over to us from SAC, didn't you?
I came over from Northwest Vista.
Sorry about that. Can you talk about your timeline from your time prior to A&M San Antonio, and when you got here, what you needed to do, and whether or not you ever felt behind, and maybe how you can kind of address some of those feelings.
So I started in Northwest Vista College. I did actually start as a dual credit student back in high school. So I already started going there for that program. So I was like, well, why not just continue and get my associates? I was actually a pre-nursing major back then, but I decided last minute to go to psychology. And then from there, I was like, well, let's go. So my sophomore year, I made that change and got that done. And then I came to A&M-SA. And from there, I think it was only maybe 1 year I actually spent there. I think I got there January 2018. It flew by fast. But yeah, sometimes you can feel kind of behind, because if you're coming from a community college, you're not having that access to research groups that you might have had at a university. And so it feels kind of like, well, did I start less than? But I think if you just put in if you have the opportunities and you take advantage of those opportunities when they're presented to you, I think you can really not necessarily make up, because I don't really think people are behind, just because you're getting that education one way or another. Would I have liked to have more research experience? Yes, but sometimes that's just the way it goes. But things always work out in the end, in that if you put in the time, you put in the effort, this is something you want to do, and you spend that time too. I think even outside of research groups, outside of classes, if this is something you're interested in, like in undergrad, I think it was before I came to Tunica, I would just browse psych info, because I was like, this is so cool. Like, let me look at all the different articles in different areas. So I think a lot of it's just, you get in what you get out what you put in.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so lastly, I want to pass along a message from Dr. Kalmbach here. She says, Amy, we are so proud of you. You're doing an excellent job both here, but in graduate studies, you make us look good. Big smiley face. Got around, talk soon. And I definitely want to reiterate that. I think you're an impressive student. I think what makes you extra special is that you want to share your experience. You want to give back, and oftentimes people talk about, once you get up on a ladder, you kick it, or do you reach back and help other people up, right? And I think you're doing a great job of reaching back and helping others kind of follow your path. And so I look forward to seeing your journey. Of course, we're going to be in touch pretty frequently, but I can't thank you enough for doing this, and I hope students benefit from it. Would it be okay if I shared your contact information, so that if students had questions, they could reach out to you?
Sure.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon, Amy.
Alrighty, sounds good. Thank you.